at 6 o'clock, the special council meeting, City of Marshfield, Tuesday, November 1st, in City Council chambers. Call a roll. Thank you. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item C, citizens' comments. We have 3 people this evening who would like to speak. You will get a total of 5 minutes. Please state your name and address and come to the podium. Jill Porter.
Jill Porter, Marshfield Public Library. Thank you. As many of you are aware, the Wisconsin Rapids Common Council is proposing a 30% cut to the McMillan Memorial Library budget for 2023. On the surface, it might be easy to think, thank God that's not us, but given that no public library operates in a bubble and we are by law organized in regional systems with shared resources, it impacts us and the other 4 libraries within Wood County. Here's why. Our library is reimbursed by Wood County as well as some adjacent counties based on a state-devised formula of cost per circulation. That is taking our operating budget for a particular year and dividing it by the number of circulations of physical items, no electric items, we have during the same calendar year. That's how they come up with something called a cost per circ. Should McMillan's budget be cut, their patrons will borrow more from us. This will place a burden on our staff and our collection and compound matters. Thanks to that state formula, we won't get to count these as part of our circulation because the library where the items are checked out, for example, McMillan, is the one that gets to count the circulation. And this is where it really gets ugly and should concern you. If our circulation drops because more of our items are borrowed at McMillan, our cost per circulation will increase. And the burden of picking up that increased cost will fall to any government unit who reimburses our library. Should these entities balk at the higher cost per circulation and choose to reimburse us at a reduced rate, say the state minimum of 70% rather than full reimbursement, the burden will fall on the taxpayers of Marshfield to make up that difference or require cuts at our own library simply because the city of Wisconsin Rapids isn't doing their part. And this will be an issue faced at Nakusa, Pittsville, Vesper, and Arpin libraries as well. It's my understanding that the Wisconsin Rapids Common Council is meeting right now to discuss the cuts with a final decision to be made November 15th. I implore you to reach out to those you know on that council and inform them that a budget cut of this size will have a negative impact on all the libraries within Wood County. If you are interested in learning more about the impacts these cuts will have on the McMillan Library, Catherine Elkert, McMillan's brand new director, will be hosting a question and answer session on Saturday, November 5th at 10 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Second, Jane Spencer.
Hi, I'm Jane Spencer, the Executive Director of the North Central Wisconsin Workforce Development Board, the address of 2801 Hoover Road in Stevens Point. I'm here tonight to talk about the request we've made for $13,500 to keep the Marshfield Job Center operating. Currently, the Workforce Development Board contributes about the same amount, $13,000. And that includes rent and towards staffing. And the city has provided about $12,500 in the past toward the staffing of the job center. The benefit to the community is to help individuals come in to do job search, register on the state system, apply for unemployment benefits. The benefit to the local employers is they can post their job postings, their openings, and we hopefully make that connection. Thank you.
Thank you. And our third, Nicole Labor. Oh, it's
Thank you. My name is Nicole Labor. I am the Director of Human Resources within the Marshfield School District. I am also here to speak with the council. Thank you for taking your time to listen, and I did receive the invitation, so thank you for that as well. So I'm here to talk about the ongoing operation of the school district safety patrol program that we have. We have the program, the donation support has been from the city of Marshfield. It spans, multiple decades. It does instill a proactive safety measure for our students who are 5th and 6th graders to take accountability and attain leadership skills through modeling and carrying out safety procedures. The program also allows students to attain and acquire skills that help them keep other students safe. They are trained volunteers that are responsible for helping our students during the drop-off and pickup procedures by assisting them across the street and in our busy bus lots. As you know, the safety patrollers take on a large responsibility. In addition, they also take on an additional burden when there is not an adult crossing guard, which are paid, city employees. All of these tasks take place in the sun, the rain, the sleet, every day of the school year. By having our students fulfill this role, it reduces the need for law enforcement and adult crossing guards to be present at each of our elementary schools. Increased school safety is also seen as a prevention of hazardous pedestrian conditions and activities that could cause serious injury. Parents also feel that their community and school environment are safer, for their children when they have assistance by the safety patrollers when crossing parking lots, streets, and busy intersections. Each year, we use the donated funds to buy supplies and provide activities for the students who come in early and stay late each day. The amount requested is $6,000, which is about $1,500 per elementary school within the city limit. That's the Grant, Lincoln, Madison, and Washington elementary schools. However, at the end of the year, we do provide a list of expenditures, and I do believe that one was provided to you as well. And we only request the funds that are needed. Funds are then divided to each of the buildings. And over the last few years have been very unique. We've not had a lot of activities for our students, so we have had pizza parties or small recognitions. They receive plaques and trophies. And it just is a way to show thanks to our student patrollers. So as you can see, the service that our students provide are beneficial to the community as a whole. It also enhances public safety, and it is also an extension of our local law enforcement and crossing guards. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other citizens' comments?
Good evening. My name is Ashley Drager. I live at 1710 Spencer Street in Marshfield. I'm also the deputy clerk for the city of Marshfield. I just wanted to speak tonight on a request that's going to come to you about continuing funding for the Marshfield Civic Band. I've been a member of the band for many, many years, and it's something that I look forward to every summer. I've made lifelong friends in the band, and even though we certainly love to put on our concerts every week for the citizens of Marshfield, and we're happy to do that, it's also nice to receive a little stipend at the end of the season for our time, since we are giving up a Tuesday and Wednesday evening to be there putting on concerts for the community. So when you're looking at that later tonight, I hope that you can still approve that and that it'll go through. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other citizens' comments? Any other citizens' comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to item D. Request to approve vision insurance contracts with National Envision Administration for calendar year 2023, presented by Sarah Dreschel, Human Resources Director.
Thank you. In previous years, the city has offered benefit-eligible employees a vision hardware plan, and that has been a rider policy to our health plan through National Vision Administrators. If an employee elected a health plan, they were automatically added to the vision plan without the option to opt out or to take only vision. Security Health Plan recently did update their preventative coverage chart for charges occurring in 2023. The preventative vision screening has been 100% covered one time per calendar year for covered employees and their covered dependents in the past. In 2023, Security Health Plan will no longer offer this option for anyone over the age of 19. As a result, preventative vision screenings will need to be added to the overall vision insurance plan. And so we reached out to NVA. NVA insurance plan for 2023 will include the one-time per calendar year preventative vision screening covered 100%. And the plan will be offered to employees as a separate coverage that they can elect or they can waive year to year, no longer tied to the health plan. The following are the proposed rates, and those are in the memo. And so staff is recommending approval of the annual insurance rates for the vision plan through NVA for 2023.
Can I get a motion? Motion by Alderman Varsho, second by Alderman Paschal. Alderman Witzel?
Are those premiums monthly premiums or?
The 66 cents for single would be per paycheck.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Alderman Handler?
What is the total cost to the city on this particular plan?
So the full premium for a month would be the $440, and then for family would be $1,582. So the employer costs are listed there. They're 85% of what it costs in total for each of the plans.
What does that come into terms of dollars then?
Can you do the math? You have a calculator? It would depend on that, yes. Because this would be slightly different than how it is right now, where we can kind of figure that out a little bit easier because it's based off of who has health coverage. This would not include anyone necessarily who has health coverage, so it would depend on who elects it. So it would be, if 200 employees took it, it would be around $3,000 for the family plan.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Alderman Wagner?
Yeah, where in the 2023 budget would we find this item?
It's not in as a separate item.
Is it carried in what's it rolled into then?
It would have to be added.
So it's not in the 2023 request?
This we just found out. Yeah, the vision, because of the issues that we were having with getting Security Health coverage to know whether or not we could have it the same as last year or different this year because of the changes. We just recently found that out when I put this together.
It's not in the 2023 budget, so it would add like, what'd you say, about 3,000? Is that what you said?
At worst.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Alderman Witzel?
Thank you. Were we aware of this when we, Security Health Plan renewal?
We hadn't until last, when we brought it up. Are you talking about the health plans?
We renewed health plans at our last meeting, correct?
Correct, and that was different. That was separate, and this wasn't brought into it because we hadn't gotten the vision back.
Were we aware that this coverage was cut at that time?
No.
So we approved an insurance policy assuming that we had vision coverage, and now we find out we don't?
That is correct.
Anyone else? Alderman Tompkins?
Okay, I'm just clarifying. So the total cost to the city, if it was 200 employees who wanted vision, would be $3,000 a year.
If they chose the family plan.
Okay.
And the piece that was with health, I'll just clarify, the piece that got removed by Security Health was just the exam itself. Originally, this vision plan that we would have been bringing before you was just a hardware plan, and it was built in before, and it isn't any longer.
See no more discussion, please vote.
No.
6 ayes and 4 nays. Motion passes. Request to approve dependent care flexible spending account contract with Employee Benefits Corporation for calendar year 2023, presented by Sarah Dreschel, Human Resources Director.
So the city worked with the Employee Benefits Corporation, EBC, for our dependent care flexible spending account. The benefit enables employees to have funds deducted from their pay, pre-tax dollars based for just specifically for daycare expenses, dependent daycare expenses. So in the past, the city has paid the administrative fees for this benefit and an annual renewal fee. The annual renewal fee is $450 and the monthly administrative costs are approximately $50 per month. Staff is recommending approval to renew the dependent care flexible spending account for 2023 with no changes from last year.
Motion by Alderman Paschal, second by Alderman Fire. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Yes.
9 ayes and 1 nay. Motion passes. Thank you, Sarah. Continue review and consideration of the recommended 2023 budget. Tom Witzel, Chairman of the Finance, Budget, and Personnel, presiding.
All right, we will continue now the review and consideration of that recommended budget. Are there any questions or comments to start off with, or do we want to jump into letter G? All right, we'll jump into letter G, which is a presentation of the 2023 budget requests received from non-city entities. So we will now give those entities an opportunity to address the council and for the council to ask questions of those entities. We will start with the North Central Wisconsin Workforce Development Board. That presentation was already given during the comments. Do we have any questions for that individual from the council? Mr. Wagner?
Thank you. I think I served on their board of directors, or on their, what they call the CEO board of the County Elected Officials Consortium for about 8 years, I think. And whenever Workforce came here before us requesting funds or city participation in any program at all, I had to recuse myself. Well, I no longer have to do that, so I can speak my mind about this. And I don't think that the community understands what the loss of this office would mean. Basically, that would mean that the only office to get unemployment benefits explained or to sign up for them would be in Wisconsin Rapids. The thing that tore me up, I think, most, and the one that I was most concerned about is we have an awful lot of child support delinquencies. And one of the rules is to keep usually it's the male, to usually keep the male out of the jail is that they have to do a job search every week, and they have to have a signed certificate that they applied for so many jobs. I don't remember how many of it is during the week. And if they don't do that, they end up back in jail, or they could end up in jail for lack of paying child support. And they would probably, in all likelihood, lose what job they have. The job service office, and this is one of the major functions of the job service office, to help people find those jobs or to help them sharpen up the searches. And believe it or not, we've had other entities in the city trying to do the same thing, but of course they aren't certified to sign off on the job service stuff that they have to do. Anyway, I think that another thing that's overlooked is we've been paying them $12,000 something a year, just as a minor stipend to keep this thing going. And they pay us rent. And I think the difference between the rent and what we pay them is something like $3,000 or $4,000. It's very, very small. I think this is yes, it's a non-government organization, but it is supported by 9 county governments. And basically they do a pretty good job of finding job placement, finding training for jobs. And I just don't think we can do without it. So I'm going to vote to support this just for that reason. Thank you.
Mrs. Tompkins?
Thank you for coming. I was just wondering off the top of your head if you knew how many clients you serve in a year.
Could you please use the microphone so that people at home can hear us?
For this year, 2022, from January to September, we served 247 people in the Marshfield Job Center, which is like an average of 24 a month.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for this particular entity? Mr. Hendler?
Thank you. I think as Mr. Wagner explained, I think it's sort of a very important service that we provide at a minimum cost. And, you know, Marshfield needs to stand up and serve these kind of people that otherwise would have to travel to Wisconsin Rapids to get, you know, the paperwork done, so to speak. So I'm going to support this, and I have before. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, next we will hear from the Northwood County Historical Society. We have a representative from the NWCHS.
Second, while I change my hat. Mike Myers from the Board of Directors of the Northwood County Historical Society. Your requests every year are for $7,500. This is typical for the last several years. As hard as we try to operate the maintenance of the Upham Mansion and any programs that we run throughout the year on strictly membership fees and the partnership with the city for $7,500. We have noticed a rather large increase in the numbers of people utilizing the facility. The Upham Mansion, people are starting to have weddings and receptions there. We also found with this year being a 150-year-old birthday for the city of Marshfield that the increase in traffic at the Upham House has been increased. The interest in local history has increased with the cooperation of some of the media, in particular Hub City Times, and the media, the social media itself. So there's hope for, at some point in time, the goal at least we have is to be self-sustaining. We are now to the point, except for the amount of money that the city is a partner with us in. And quite frankly, it'd be difficult to imagine keeping the operation as we have it without your generosity. It's a diamond in the rough, the Upham Mansion. It's one of the very few buildings that survived the disastrous fire in 1887 that leveled the city. Fortunately for Mr. Upham, the wind was blowing in the right direction. The house was built several years before that. So it's a gem for the community. It's a prize. And those of us who work very closely with it feel very strongly about that. Again, our objective is to, at some point, be self-sustaining. We're in the process, it's an ongoing process to establish a fund drive to obtain some sustaining funds that we can operate from. But right now it's on, we've got some major projects throughout the years. The roof was a big project, the painting was another project. All things that have to be done to a building that's that age. So we would certainly appreciate your continued support and your continued interest in the Upham and of our local history.
Thank you. Any questions? Doesn't appear so. Thank you very much. Next, we will have the opportunity to hear from Marshfield School District. That was already presented, so we have questions for that entity. Mr. Fisher. We'll give her a chance to get to the podium.
I'll wait. Thank you. So I just have a couple questions. One is in 2020 with the lockdown, I'm assuming, did you use all the money from that year's grant? And if so, how did you use it?
Yes, in 2020, we did not. So we did request at the beginning of the year, the $6,000, which was awarded. And then we had to rethink how we were going to reward the students because, again, we did not finish that school year. So we ended up using about $1,400 up until about March. So that's what we had requested for the expenditures. Those were water during hot days. Those were possible trophies and acknowledgement, gift cards possibly, but we did not take any of those excursions. We did need, and I don't want you to think that it's all fun and games. We do provide new vests. We do buy training materials and new supplies with the funding as well.
Okay. If the city were to ever cease funding this for $6,000, would the school district pick this up?
We would look at incorporating it into our, we would have to, we do need our safety patrollers. I do feel that it is a direct extension of the local law enforcement and the city crossing guards. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen. But yes, we would have to look at incorporating that into our budget.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Hendler.
Thank you. At this time, I just want you to know I really support this kind of program. I think it reminds me when I was school crossing guard about 70-some years ago. I didn't get any pizza, but I won't hold that against the school district. No, I think it's a wonderful program and we should maintain it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mrs. Spiros. Sorry, one of my monitors wasn't showing you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I think the program is wonderful too, but I have to be honest, I think it should be funded by the school district. I'm not sure why we are funding that. We do pay for the adult crossing guards already from our budget, and we pay for resource officers from our budget. And it's good to know that you guys will pick it up if indeed we do cut it. It's a great program, but I do feel it should be funded by the school district.
Any other questions or comments? I just have one quick question. In the itemized list of expenditures, I noticed that the schools are not evenly identified with the amount of money that they receive, and what they spend the money on is very different for the different schools. Is there a reason for that?
We have a varying number of students that participate at each building, and we do have an individual that organizes those activities. So if one year they have other things happening within their buildings, they may not need to have those activities happening, or if their vests and signs are still okay, they don't spend that money that particular school year, so they may request it the year after.
Okay, because I see like Grant has Melody Gardens, Rose Bowl, Pizza Ranch, Rogers Cinema, Dairy Queen, where Washington has Target gift cards and Sky's Pizza. So it seems very, very unbalanced. And then the dollar amounts, of course, are very unbalanced as well.
Yes, so again, Grant being a 4-track school, they do have the double amount of students that participate. And yes, maybe that organizer is a little bit more organized than the others, possibly.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wagner?
Yeah, do you have staff that is assigned to supervising and scheduling the crossing guards?
That's correct. We have one at each of these buildings.
One in each of these buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Are they compensated any differently for than above their normal teaching salaries for being the supervisor?
Yep, they do receive an additional stipend for that. I don't know the amount, but they do receive.
That was the next question, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't have that information with me at the time.
But they do get compensated separately for it?
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions for the Marshfield School District? Looks like none. Thank you. Next, we'll hear from the Marshfield Civic Band.
Good evening. I'm Robert Johannick, and I'm the music director and conductor of the Marshfield Civic Band. And I've just completed last summer my 20th year as in that position. The Civic Band has been a part of this community on and off since 1895. There's been live music, and the band, of course, has taken various forms over the years. It was an Army band, a National Guard band, a Civil Air Patrol band, and then later in the 1960s, it became a civic band. And it became a civic band under the direction of Mr. Jim Rasmussen, who you probably all know, who unfortunately passed away approximately a year ago. And he was director of the band for 40 years. And I took the band over in 2001, I think it was 2002. And we have been playing at Columbia Park and other various venues since that time. We have a summer season. The only season, of course, we didn't have was during COVID in 2020, for obvious reasons. We do attract a number of musicians from not just Marshfield, but the area to play in the band. And it is one of the few opportunities where people who maybe in their 70s get to rub elbows and do a nice, neat program with high school students who are 14, 15, or 16 years old. So it really is a wonderful opportunity to bridge the age gap there. The Civic Band also appears in the cemetery for Memorial Day. A year ago, we also appeared at the 32nd Division Park for the remembrance of 9/11 ceremony. This coming summer, we're going to be hosting the Wisconsin Bandmasters Association Convention here in Marshfield. That will bring some people into our community. We've had very large crowds this past summer at Columbia Park, and people very much appreciate what we do. The request for $4,800 has not increased for 18 years. And the money is used primarily to support the band. As someone said before, the players do get a very small stipend at the end of the year for playing. And that's been that way for many years. So your $4,800 donation has helped keep us going. I personally raise money as well in the community on my own as much as I possibly can. But the $4,800 is the key donation to keep everything running. We are very grateful to you for your past donations. We're also very grateful and aware that you do allow us to use Oak Avenue Community, I keep saying Old Armory, Oak Avenue Community Center to store our library. And of course, Columbia Park Band Show is very nice. It's a beautiful park. And we have a lot of people that come in from out of town to hear these concerts, I think. So it is really serving, I think, a valuable service in the community.
Thank you. Mrs. Tompkins.
Thank you for coming down to speak to us. I'm just wondering, out of the money, the $4,800, how much is your total stipend that you would give? Not individual stipends, but what would you?
You mean for the average player?
Well, actually, what are you spending total on your stipends every year?
I would say around $5,000.
Right, thank you.
And we have every year we have about 60 to 70 musicians that play with us, so.
Any other questions? Doesn't look like it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have the Marshfield Area Coalition of Youth, or MACY.
Good evening, Scott Larson here. I'm a board member for the Marshfield Area Coalition for Youth. Just as a little summary here, MACY was formed in 1990, and its purpose strives to reduce and prevent underage drinking, prescription drug misuse, marijuana, heroin, and methamphetamine use. And we have several subcommittees that have programming that generates these opportunities. One such is our Marshfield and Columbus Leadership Alliance, or MCLA as we call it. And this is the Marshfield Public High School, Columbus Catholic High School that work together on school-based initiatives related to bullying, mental health, and substance use prevention. And so they have several programming activities that they do during the course of the year as well. A second one is our Drug Task Force. And the Drug Task Force requests funds that's used at the booth at the Central Wisconsin Fair, which is one of Marshfield's highest attended activities. And the exhibit area at the Central Wisconsin Fair is obviously an excellent opportunity for MACY to inform, educate, and provide resources to the public, answer questions, give partners of MACY an avenue to disseminate important information. In addition to the funds for the fair booth, the Drug Task Force is also asking for funding support in educational and promotional materials to distribute at the fair. And then third, programming subcommittee is our Mental Health Task Force. And that is obviously focused on promoting awareness of local and national mental health resources while reducing the stigma related to mental health in the city of Marshfield. And we'd like to expand the use of the sign program and develop other types of signage related to mental health for our promotional activities and the events. So a quick little summary of what MACY is and where the $3,300 request would be used as it relates to those three programming areas.
Thank you. Mr. Wagner?
Thank you. Wasn't Mackey, wasn't MACY also involved with the police department and doing compliance checks at the
Yes.
various bars?
Yes, that's part of the check. There's several program areas that relate to that. We do have involvement with the police department as well. Typically, we have somebody from the police department that serves on
Didn't you also
on the
receive
BC
a
board.
very large Department of Transportation grant to do that?
That I'm not aware of us receiving a Department of Transportation grant for that. If it does, it may go to another
I seem to
entity.
remember an expenditure of somewhere around $30,000 in 1 year for overtime and that sort of thing for just the compliance. Do you remember that?
That I don't. Again, it's likely it could have gone to another entity that, again, Macy is working with as it relates to the conducting of some of those activities.
Does Mackey contribute to Macy?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Tompkins.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering if when you're at the state fair, when you work with the police department, do you guys coordinate with Narcan distribution or fentanyl test strips at all when you are interfacing with the public?
Those can be, that's part of the aspects of the education component that goes on with that. It would be a case of, at the fair, when they're working at the booth, it's really a lot about trying to disseminate as much information and provide as much information on the issues related to, again, drug use, alcohol use, and the overuse of those products and the prevention aspect and the impact that can have on youth and trying to prevent that. So again, it is part of what we're doing is working with those other, with law enforcement, with the county and other resources to help medical facilities as well to try and help reduce the overuse of alcohol and try and prevent the use of illicit drugs.
Mrs. Spiros.
Do you know what is the operating budget of Macy? And what is the percent that the city is giving towards their operating costs?
Overall, we have a very small operating budget. I would say what the city contributes to $3,300 would be, again, most of the funding for what those three program subcommittees are talking about. The other components of that are the interactions with organizations such as the Wood County and the drug programming that goes on there. So there are some state grant funds that also are worked on or worked through with Macy's assistance. I hope that helps
And is there anybody?
Go ahead.
Is there anyone else? Is there anyone else who's contributing?
Yes, there are. Again, there are several other grants through other programming that's part of the subcommittee works that Macy has under its auspices. And those grants are, again, in a lot of cases, are received either through the Marshfield Clinic Health System or through Wood County. Macy as itself is not a incorporated entity at this time, so it's more of an operating assistance.
Anything else, Mrs. Spiros?
No, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few questions.
Sure.
First of all, I didn't catch the overall budget amount, but what is the actual percentage? Can you give me just a ballpark? I mean, is this a 1% of the overall budget, 10%? Like, what is our portion percentage-wise?
Overall, as it relates to it, I would say it's probably somewhere between 25 and 30% of all the programming that Macy is undertaking.
Okay, and I know at one time we had a number of people from the police department playing support roles. And I'm assuming that's still the case.
Yes.
How many people from the police department are supporting Macy?
Well, we're just at this point, it's a case of, we just asked the police chief to designate an officer back to our board of directors. And so that's been done now. So I think it's at most 2. There was, given their staffing issues, there was a little lag in there. Now we're back up to.
Currently, we have one that is about to be on the board shortly. And then when we have things like compliance checks and things like that, we'll have some of our staff assist with that. And then some of the grant money goes to be reimbursed for our staff.
Just in a follow-up, do we ever, does the police department track how much staff time is given to Macy in the sense of what we're really donating in kind?
Well, the only one that's donating time would be the one that's on the board. And we feel that that's part of our purpose as a police department, to serve on boards that would focus on stopping our drug epidemic, our underage drinking, and all of those. So that person is usually on staff time attending those meetings. Other than that, we don't have anyone else that's specifically attached to Macy. We may have support roles for special events.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Doesn't look like it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this time, all those items are on the budget, so unless there's action taken, they will remain on the budget. Next, we will go to letter H, receive staff updates, if any, regarding questions that were raised at the October 24th meeting. I think we had some questions. Looks like Jordan is going to step up and talk, perhaps.
What are we voting on?
So I'm going to pass out some packets that I believe portion of it was emailed out to you today by by Jennifer on behalf of Steve.
That was emailed at 4:30. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I apologize, older person's bureaus. I think you might find the first page and second page of this inside the email, but I had some actual items that address some of the direct questions that I did not include in Jennifer's email. So I apologize, I can get those out after. So first, on the first 2 pages, what you're actually looking at is some items that we, over time, we submitted a budget probably about 3 weeks ago. And within that time, there's been some changes that we've discussed at our level and amongst with Steve to add into the budget. Fortunately for the general fund, it makes really little impact. Actually, it is a beneficial impact because we realized that we didn't have the professional services within inside of the admin area for wastewater and EMS. So that really offset a lot of the expenses that we needed to add. So talking to that item as far as the general fund, the professional services charges that we found were about $70,000. That's really consistent with the past few years. Like I said, both wastewater and the EMS fund. Other items that we had within there were, items that we kind of noticed that hadn't really, gone on for several years, like the per diems or employee fitness wellness program. There were some property insurance renewals as well. And then one of the bigger items that we didn't realize was there was a second layer of PEP plans. We have a grandfather PEP plan and a police per paycheck PEP plan that we did not include. That's about $12,800 that we had to include on there. because it's a consistent paid amount for their post-employee health benefits program. Some other items I think were related to the 401 fund. I think I tried to touch on this topic previously and was told to bring it back to this session. This is related to the streetlights grant. I think we had the grant funding and revenue with inside the 401 fund, but we didn't actually have the expenditures for it. And I believe engineering can probably talk to you guys in circles around what this program is actually for, but I wanted to make sure that we had both the expenses and the revenues included in that budget for this next year. Otherwise, we get to next year when we actually receive the grant funds and can't do the project and have to come before you with a budget resolution. The other items in 410 were related to some, I guess, some cleanup of one, the desk and HVAC program item that's within inside the 2022 CIP. During this week, I was searching through funding sources for the desk program and realized that we had funds in the general fund, funds in the 410, and there was a note that this EMS fund was paying for a portion of it, but I couldn't actually find the EMS portion of it inside the budget for 2022. I found the other two items, and it sounds like also that desk and system won't be installed until 2023. So noting that general fund is the lapsing fund and 410 is not, I included kind of the net difference of the project with inside the 410 as far as an expense. Also noting that we have a donation agreement with MSTC, Mid-State Technical College, whereby we receive $25,000 worth of donations, and we match with $25,000 worth of expenses of the city's funds. Now, in the CIP, it notes that we just pay $25,000. I think it's important to show all components of the agreement, the donation plus $25,000 of our expenses and $25,000 of expenses that MSTC's donation is going for. So $50,000 worth of expenses, $25,000 worth of revenue, and $25,000 worth of net, debt proceeds. So the debt proceeds were already included. 601, again, this is just related to the insurance renewals, which we got after our first meeting. Same thing, well, with 605, there's insurance renewals, and as was voted on, I think it was a motion by Wagner to remove the debt service component from the EMS fund. So I removed the interest component from the EMS fund, as was voted on that motion. 701, this is, when we were originally doing 701 budget, I'm just gonna say I did not know what to put in for diesel fuel. So we, myself and Dan sat down, we had a good discussion about what revenues for diesel fuel should be coming in for and what expenses the diesel fuel should be showing up as. And noting such, we quickly found out that a lot of the overage for I think it was around $400,000 that the fund was under. We cut about 271 out of that. So we increased the revenue to be more adequate. Really, the revenues should be more in line with exactly what the expenses should be. So that was found out. Now there's two items on your second page. On the very bottom, I think Steve speaks to these in his memo, specifically as additional requests. $10,000 for the tipster or major investigation fund, and $5,600, which is the tripod kit. These weren't inside of like the main summary page because from my understanding, I believe Steve may have wanted you to vote on those items, but I may have taken that incorrectly. So if it is the will of the council that they want to add those items, I just think we should probably have a motion or something on that.
The other piece that we needed to talk about either at this meeting or a subsequent one if you deem it necessary is the expenditure restraint program, which is a state program that gives you a little bonus if you keep your budget within, increase year over year within a certain percentage. This year, that percentage is 8%, which we have not seen In recent years, it's usually 2 to 3% that you're allowed due to inflation to go over budget. Last year, when we talked about this, I believe we added in 400,000 to take advantage of that flexibility in our budget. Now, it's important to know that the levy limit, which would fund this, does not have the same inflationary gap. So what we would be attempting to accomplish in this year would be to give us room in our budget should we decide to do a referendum later in 2023. We're too late to do that now. In order to make up money for public safety or otherwise in future budgets. So this gives us flexibility. Now, if we were to add it into the 22 budget, the funding source for that would be fund balance applied, but it would not be available to spend unless we actually got a funding source, right? So it just moves that budget amount up for future years in preparation for should we need to incur additional expenses for if we decide in the future to bring the EMS fund into general fund. We wouldn't exit the program if we had the budget flexibility there. I know I see a lot of confusion. So what questions do we have?
Mr. Wagner.
Yeah, you're suggesting we do something similar to what we did last year. And I guess I got lost on this thing. We could take fund balance and apply it, but we would have to have restrictions on it that we actually could not spend it. Is that correct?
Unless, a scenario where we would actually spend this money in a future year, not in 2023, would be if we had a referendum to make up our funding gap in EMS. That could be a scenario. Other than that, I don't know what sort of situation would enable us to really take advantage of doing this. It's the lopsided restrictions we have from the state, right? Increase your expenses, but no funding. This is the same old problem, but eventually it will likely become necessary that we look at a referendum, whether it's in 2023 for 2024 tax revenue or in 2024 for 2025 tax revenue. It's going to be likely. I think we just found Chief Letty sent out a note today about referendums specifically for public safety. There are about 8 or 9 on the November election, and it appears to be the best way other communities are finding to fund these services without making cuts. So, given our situation, it's likely we will be in that same category.
But with that, if we do go for a referendum, it won't be this year.
We cannot make it for 2023 tax collections. It would be in 24. But if you don't take advantage of having the excess budget available, should we do a referendum and it passes, we could potentially have to exit the program for a year because we don't have room in the budget to absorb expenses that we could now cover with a referendum.
Okay, I'm still a little bit confused on this, but when I looked at the budget summary, when Steve put that out initially, we looked at it. And I'll have to admit, I've been focused primarily on this EMS situation for the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks maybe. But I was overlooking what I initially found that disturbed me in the budget itself, that we had already used something like $400,000, a little over $400,000 of the fund balance to balance this budget, plus $400,000 of, I think the word he used was repurposed ARPA funds.
Correct.
So you're saying now we want to take more and put more of that fund balance in and claim it as an expense somewhere, and I'm not quite sure where we would claim it as an expense, but we want to claim that as an expense so we could be eligible to get $400,000 back from somebody else, or from the expenditure restraint program. Is that correct?
Not quite.
Oh, God.
The expenditure restraint program is a revenue, okay?
Yeah.
In 2023, it's going to be worth $487,000 to the city as a revenue, okay? If we keep our budget within the constraint that the program, each year it changes based on CPI, so you take your previous year's budget and they allow you this inflationary factor, and that's how much you're able to increase your budget next year. It doesn't mean you have to actually budget and expend those amounts, but it's available to you. Now, if we...
Whoa, you lost me there. You said we don't have to budget those amounts? I thought we have to show it as an expense so to increase up to that 8%.
You're not required to increase your budget to do that. It's more of a future planning strategy. It's if you were to go over 8% in the 2023 budget, then you would exit expenditure restraint and not receive the subsequent years state aid back, which would be worth almost $500,000 for us. So it's this would be a planning strategy for future. It is not to be expended in 2023.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
So we have the ability to increase any amount we want up into the expenditure restraint amount.
Correct.
What you're saying is that we should maximize it because the following year's expenditure restraint is based on the previous years.
Correct.
So if we don't increase by 8%, we cannot increase off of that increased by 8% amount for the next year. We would be stuck with whatever we had.
Correct.
Thank you. And where do we hide that? Where do we put that money?
In the past, we have put that as in an account called contingency, and any spending from that account would require formal action in the means of a budget resolution. So think of it as a placeholder.
Is that what you're expecting to do this year? Or, sorry, what you're presenting as an option for this year?
Correct.
Okay.
At this point, we would have 1.4 million based on what our budget year over year is. And since we've already increased our budget, the over prior year, you take that off. We had the capability to go as high as $1.89 million more in our budget this year. So we've already used about 400,000 of that. So if we chose to go this route, you could put any amount from 0 to 1.4 million in that contingency line.
Mrs. Tompkins?
If we chose to go that route, just to remind us and to keep it clear, could you name that line item contingency only if a referendum is voted in?
We can certainly do that.
Otherwise, we'll have presentations. We would like to use our contingency fund for this or that, and we might forget that we actually don't have that money.
I would prevent that from happening.
Any other questions from what's been presented? Oh, Mrs. Spiros, sorry.
That's okay, Tom. Jennifer, the expenditure restraint program has always been explained to me as there's a certain amount of communities that qualify and you get a piece of the pie. So with it being able to go to the 8%, would you expect our piece of the pie to become smaller because a lot more cities are going to take advantage of this and thus be eligible for the program, expenditure restraint program? Because that's kind of how I see it would happen. I think that you're going to see a lot more eligible cities and your piece of pie is going to get smaller because of eligibility, or do they increase the amount then because there's more participants in the program?
It can go either way. There are communities that will exit expenditure restraint as well as qualify. For instance, if a community is doing a referendum and they get it to pass, but they didn't have room in their budget, they exit expenditure restraint for that year. So it goes both ways. Our expenditure restraint value has increased over the past several years, even given all of those circumstances. I don't have the exact formula. I don't know who is eligible on a every year, but we can certainly ask the state.
Thank you.
I think I echo a concern that Mrs. Spiros is bringing up, and that is that with the large increase to the percentage allowed, there may be some that would have exited the program, but because even though they passed a referendum, they're still within that 8%. That
Could be.
So we may be getting a smaller slice is what I think she's getting to.
Right, you're either in it or you're out of it.
But there's going to be more in, so there's less pie for each slice.
Potentially.
Okay. Any other questions regarding the questions that were asked previously in the presentation of that information that we've received from staff?
So I just have two more items to add to this. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I didn't get to there was a question on how would we fund the ambulance. So I did include that as, I think, your third page and fourth page. Right here, I just have just a blanket kind of, okay, $310,000 for the ambulance and the power load system. The EMS Flex grants are the first thing to go that help take care of the majority of it as far as 115,000. So you got about a third of it taken care of right there. There were some items that were brought forward, I think, by DC Bacus as far as items removed from the 2023 budget and either or paid for by the funding assistance program grants. And then additional funding assistance grants that were available because of ARPA. But we need to be able to spend those ARPA funds in order to get the additional funds. And I believe the way that this is going to work is we're going to spend those funding assistance program funds on budgetary or normal budgetary items in order to make the room for this, essentially, instead of utilizing the fees to pay for those items. There's also the town of Arpin quote and the village of Arpin quote, which we sent this week. I'm not sure if we've heard back yet. And again, these have not been agreed to yet. There's also the removal of the interest item that was explained earlier. Excuse me. And then that leaves a remainder of about 77,000. Yeah.
So given all of those changes, that would leave a remainder of about 77,000 left to come up with a funding source for. And the thought is that our property reval was to be used with ARPA funds, and we had budgeted that expense to be $250,000. That was in anticipation of doing a full reval rather than the statistical reval that is currently out for quote. So we expect that amount to be much less than the $250,000, and that money could then be repurposed to make up the remainder of that $77,000.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it safe to say that we're using ARPA dollars to balance our budget? Is that an accurate?
Yeah. This relates to the general fund budget question, but I believe, yes, we're utilizing that and fund balance applied.
Okay. How much do we have left in ARPA?
So
That was because we had certain items that were budgeted, but there was also an amount kind of left open. How much is that?
My file is struggling to get, oh, here we go. So for 2022, we had budgeted $1,084,000, and what was repurposed, and most of those projects are in flight. And then we had on our list, we have about 115,000 that was undistributed or reserved for future of the total 1,933,000 that we received. And what was repurposed was a Lincoln Avenue extension from Ives to McMillan, and that was worth $335,000. And then I believe the other, there was $100,000 that was a placeholder for affordable housing that is being repurposed to balance the 23 budget.
Thank you. I mean, I know we're talking about EMS. As you were bringing this up, I just felt like.
Sure.
Thank you. And I'll come back at a later time to talk about.
Mrs. Spiros?
Jennifer, you made a comment about the full re-eval versus the new proposed eval coming in at much less. And I thought I understood you to say we originally set aside $250,000, and you thought that it would come in significantly less. Any idea what significantly less would be? And I won't hold your feet to the fire on the exact number, but if there's somewhere in the ballpark.
So the quotes are due back on the 4th. So we don't have it specifically, but since it's a statistical analysis versus a full reval, possibly 100, less than what we thought.
100,000.
Right. Again, the quotes aren't due back yet, so.
Thank you.
Mrs. Tompkins?
Thank you. I just want to clarify. So we have, I think you said $550,000 of ARPA funds that were not distributed, repurposed, or were used for housing, and then plus the $250,000 that we had for this. Is that correct? So there's 550 plus the 250.
Right. Some of that 250 will most definitely be consumed, and we'll find out on the 4th how much of that. But it's a placeholder. So there could be more available.
And just to clarify, and I know this is the general fund, but what that 550,000 has already been put into the budget to balance it. Is that correct?
Not completely. The 115,000 that we had left unassigned to a project has still not been assigned. That was being sort of held back for any overages on existing projects that we had already committed to.
Any other questions for staff? Any other information from staff?
Yes. There was a 5th page to your document. This is a pointed question as far as how do we come up with the amounts for revenues for EMS. And like I stated, you could really use a different gross number, use a different discount number, use a different ratio. At the end of the day, it's looking at payments or expected payments. Now, the net amount, the $3.2 million worth of gross revenues, $1.7 million worth of discounts, leaves us with $1.5 million worth of net revenue from patients. This 5th page kind of shows you our payments and refunds from both phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 of our ambulance collections year-to-date. And in there, we see average monthly payments and for the full year, and then average monthly payments for the last 5 months. So I picked a range in between there, one showing 1.46 million and one showing 1.52 million, and we ended up with around 1.5 million. So it's explainable that we could receive $1.5 million worth of net revenue. So I wanted to speak to that question.
Any other questions from council for the staff? Mr. Wagner?
Yeah, are you creating, for bookkeeping purposes, a fund to show an allowance for the discounts of those?
So there is, I kind of want to differentiate the topics that we're talking about. Is it a fund, allowance for discounts related to bad debts or allowance for discounts related to, medical contracts? Because that's what we're intending to essentially do here. We have inside of our budget $1.7 million worth of discounts budgeted. So that's essentially acting as such. We also have included underneath that line, there's bad debt expense of, I believe, $147,000. So we're showing that as well as a larger line item, not $35,000 like previous years.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else from staff? Anything else from council on these items? Just to clarify, there was concern that if we were to dissolve the EMS enterprise fund, this would be the year to do it because of the ability with the expenditure restraint. But if I'm understanding correctly, that has the negative impact of the debt that comes along with it, which then has to, it'll negatively impact our situation. But with your proposal for the, I guess the only way I can say it is unfunded contingency, that would allow us to do a dissolution of that EMS enterprise fund at a future year?
It could. I had conversations today with both Ellers and CLA regarding that topic. And another suggestion that as we were going through scenarios would be to not roll it into the general fund, but to create a special revenue fund, which would behave as a governmental fund, similarly to the general fund. Then the revenues, expenditures would go into the general fund. What would be eliminated would be the expenditure related to future funding of retirement, which currently is an expense in an enterprise fund. And then also the assets, the building, the equipment used in EMS would not get reported in a special revenue fund. They would get rolled up into the government-wide statement. So there's advantages of eliminating depreciation expense and then any expense related to that future pension funding. So given that, it almost would appear that the anticipated revenues and expenditures would level out. It doesn't make up for the cash deficit from the past, but that is how the fund was being budgeted, as anticipated revenues and expenditures, leaving the debt off, which would now be levied. And then as a bonus, depreciation would also come off that. So there's another scenario that in our operating plan, Dave Ferris is working on what that might look like if we pulled it into the general fund or set up a special revenue fund. If we set up a special revenue fund and the fund still was in a deficit, then we would have perhaps an obligation to make a transfer from the general fund to the special revenue fund to make it balance and not be in a deficit. But we'd be able to do that with that expenditure restraint availability, and a successful referendum. So there's a lot of different things that would have to fall into place in order for that to all happen, and to dissolve the enterprise fund and either create a special revenue fund or roll it into the government, the general fund.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to, sorry, Mr. Wagner?
Yeah, that you're anticipating there's almost no other way out of this than a referendum and basically the ability to create a revenue stream to take care of the deficit. Is that correct?
The short of creating a new revenue stream or a referendum, it's unlikely that this would ever be a model that's sustainable as an enterprise fund. I had talked at length with Mr. Troutman from CLA, and it's visible across all the clients that they audit that have this scenario. It's very tough. And, you know, it becomes harder and harder as general fund reserves are being depleted to have any other option other than a referendum.
I'll just level my goal, and it may be simplistic compared to what the rather sophisticated approach you're taking with this thing. But my goal is to try and keep from getting that liability that is the EMS fund right now into the general fund, and delaying that as long as I can, and at the same time levying for the debt, which would go into the fund, which would start absorbing and soaking up some of the deficit, and then also the professional services fee. I think that was another one. And basically figuring that in over 2 years or so, maybe 3 years, it would possibly get that deficit down low enough where if we did do away with the fund, we wouldn't kill the general fund by doing it. It wouldn't have a significant impact on the fund itself. That's where I'm trying to go with this. And I will chase this referendum and the expenditure restraint program around by the tail until I get it. So you can, but that's where I'm coming from. So that you know what my intentions are.
All right. If there's nothing further than on H, we'll move on to letter I, which is council discussion and possible changes to the recommended 2023 budget. And we'll just do this very orderly. We'll go district by district. Start over here on my right with Mr. Hendler, if he's got any discussion or possible changes he would like to address.
Why is everybody always picking on me, you know? Well, I can tell after tonight's discussion, I think life in Marshfield, from the council viewpoint, I think is very complicated, difficult. But given the options that we have, we're limited. And my hope is that somehow, some way, we save the EMS account. The other thing that's in the back of my mind are the 3 fire positions. And the other one is sort of an optional thing, is the ambulance. But that is my biggest concern, because people are concerned about their safety. And when they need the ambulance calls, that we're in a position to do what we need to do. And that is, my neighborhood has really gone into sort of a transit. I'm surrounded by people that are 65 years and older. And one has only come into the community 3 months ago, and they've already used the ambulance twice. So they're very concerned about this. And I think as a council, we need to really stress this, that this remains in place. And finally, the smaller accounts that we have, like the civic band, the historical society, It's part of quality of life in Marshfield, and we need to support that. That's just the way I feel about it. Thank you.
Mr. O'Reilly?
Yeah, being the first time going through this budget process is interesting, to say the least. The one factor that I cannot get past is none of these things we're looking at doing to fix it include cutting any services. And ultimately, I guess in a layman's world, this is how a budget works in a household. This is how a budget goes everywhere. We cannot forget that this referendum we discuss is also going to impact every home that is already struggling very much with the same problems that the city is running into. I guess I understand the difficulties, but I honestly believe we need to look at cutting, and maybe not long-term, but something in the interim, because we're going to hurt the people of this city with increased taxes. So that's my key outlook on things at this point. Thank you.
Mrs. Spiros?
Okay. Are you sure you really want to come to me next?
Well, you're next in order, so yes.
I'm just kidding. I have a couple of clarification questions that I'd like to ask from our finance department. So up to this point, because this has been multiple meetings and over a lot of different hours, I'm looking for a couple of answers. Did we or have we found a new revenue source since our discussions on this budget began?
Not in addition to the additional fees that were presented by Chief Fletty and the street lighting program that we could potentially implement early 2023. So in terms of revenue stream, what other than that, no.
Okay, so I went back and looked through the many emails that have come in, and it looked like they thought possibly looking at the lighting proposal, that would be about a $2 additional fee onto every
utility
homeowner or every utility. It'd be about $2 a month. And I'm sorry, can you refresh what sort of revenue that would produce?
For 2023, we're looking at, depending on how quickly we could implement, roughly 150, I believe is the number we put in the budget. But it's anticipated to cover the full cost of the street lighting program, which is going to be $240,000 in 2023, and it just goes up from there as utility rates increase. So it's meant to offset as much of that charge as possible.
Got you. And up to this point, have we made any cuts from the budget?
Not from the level 2, which is the city administrator's recommended budget. There were cuts made from the department's submitted budget to get to that point before you even saw it. But we have not, I don't think your list included any reductions in budget as far as cutting programs or cutting expenditures.
Okay. How much, what is the percent of cuts that we need to make to stop the bleeding?
Are you referring to stopping the use of fund balance applied or reducing that amount to make it zero? So that's $800-ish thousand on 2.35, I believe, is our budget currently.
Mm-hmm. So 800,000 in cuts is what's needed to stop stealing from the general fund to balance budget.
Essentially, yes.
Okay. And what would be your, so that's what, about 4%?
Roughly.
Roughly 4%. And at this point, we've got 0% that we've proposed, right?
Correct.
Okay. And so if 4% would just break us even, essentially. I'm trying to talk in terms that I understand, and perhaps people who are listening understand. So I'm sorry if those are, below your, below your.
No, continue.
Okay, so we need to find $800,000 worth of cuts in addition to what was already proposed by staff when they were putting this budget together to stop robbing from the general fund to balance budget. And then that doesn't really get us ahead at all. This breaks us even. Okay. So I guess I'm kind of concerned that at this point we haven't found $800,000 in cuts. So I'm going to come to you again, and it sounds like you and Jordan have poured over this budget and line by line by line. I'm going to ask you a couple really tough questions. Does this budget have any fluff in it? Is there ever times when the items that are listed are actually listed as higher than what they're really expected to cost?
We really try to cut that out between the department level and the administrator recommended level. I'm going to grab one piece of note. So of our almost $24 million budget, we're looking at salaries and benefits as 69% of that. So there's no fluff in the salaries and benefits. From there, it just goes down. Operating supplies are 9%. Repairs and maintenance are 8%. Motor pool, which is benefits the internal service fund, is just under 5%. Professional services, 2%, utilities, 3%. So there's a lot of relatively fixed costs in there. What we challenged departments to look for, with the goal of preserving our permanent workforce and its benefits, what could we do? And that's almost 70% of the budget, right? So there's very little else that they were able to look at, but we did challenge them in your professional services, what's really necessary. Are we duplicating efforts? Could any of that be done with our own staff time? And a lot of those services that we have, for instance, in IT, the IT budget is going up and up, and we challenged Ding to talk about that. But we're under a renewal for Microsoft Office licenses. Can't avoid things that are essential to running the business. There's very few things in there that when I looked at certain line items, we're under contract to provide the services. For example, garbage collection and recycling. We have a contract for that. We can't, unless we go back and negotiate, how many times we're going to pick up garbage and recycling or fall leaves. There isn't wiggle room in some of those things, but they were asked to look at those things, and it's really hard to say when most of the expenditures are salaries and benefits.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you saying is that you don't really feel that there's a lot of stuff in there. So we get back to the obviously glaring, and before I even say this, I want to say, I think what we offer to the citizens is very important. Obviously, I think, police and fire is probably our top priority to the people who are paying all the bills. And those are the citizens. Remember that they are paying all the bills. So I want to stress that that's really important. I've made several comments that, as far as that haven't been taken well, like cutting the $6,000 for the little kids that are standing out in the snow and in the rain. And I think that program is very important. But listen, we only have so much money to spend, and we only have so many people to get the money from. And a lot of people are very taxed. So it's our job as a city, as a council, as a finance department, as a city administrator, to do the right thing by people. And sometimes it's very difficult, but you have to make cuts. And that's an unfortunate thing. And so I want to go now to the 69% of our, our expenses being connected to salary and benefits. And I want to talk about staffing in different departments. And I'm assuming you guys have looked at that. Did you discuss staffing in detail with each department head? And was there any wiggle room?
We asked about temporary, starting with temporary and seasonal work, and I believe they're in IT. And if Ing would like to come up and talk about that, you know, the proposals that were made to reduce that. Aside from, we did not go into the deep dive of saying, are we adequately staffed in each department to provide the service that we are? So, you know, we did not look at in detail, what makes up public works? Is that staff? You know, is there duplicative staff? Is it too much? Is it too little? We did not go to that depth in this round, but it is a question that I did raise in terms of service level. What does our community expect? What do they prioritize? And that follows along with how much funding should be allocated to that. So by the time I started asking those questions, you know, we hadn't gone to that level to say, should we have X number of firefighters to meet the service level that we need? Do we have the right amount of admin staff to, you know, account for all of the city's transactions throughout the various departments? We haven't gone down to that level. I know personally in finance, we worked, you know, that type of collaboration with the clerk's office to eliminate, you know, a half-time position and consolidate it. That was work that was done in our department, but I believe other departments would say they look at it when there's a vacant position to see if there's that sort of staffing that wouldn't need to be replaced.
Okay. You know, I just keep coming back to the 4% to stop the bleed. And I feel like it is our job as common council members. It is your task and responsibility. It is not pleasant. It is not happy. It doesn't make people jump for joy. And it's not something I like to do. I'm sure it's not something that the city staff wants to do. But we have to find that $800,000 to cut. I firmly believe that. I'm going to stop for now because I want to hear, you know, if my colleagues have come up with concrete cuts and what those numbers would add up to. But I think that we're going to have to circle back and find $800,000 worth of cuts at the very least. And I want to remind people who are listening, and I want to remind my colleagues, I don't like doing this, but it is our responsibility, and it's a tough one. And we can't keep, you know, borrowing from, you know, robbing from Peter to pay Paul. It just cannot continue to happen. It will bite you in the hind end at some point in time. So with that, I will yield the floor to Adam, who I believe is next.
Mr. Fisher, you're up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple questions too. So before you go, I heard you say the overall budget, 24 million, correct? Roughly. I did the math, pretty much worth 800,000. That's actually closer to 3.5. So not 4%. Sorry, I'm a detailed person, so that was annoying me. So it's actually closer to 3.5% if I'm doing the math right. I tend to agree. Whenever you're looking at any budget, you either have to come to the table and find new revenue streams, or you have to find ways to cut to balance your budget. The problem with government is revenue always goes back to the taxpayer, and you're constantly going back to the same household multiple different ways to collect that money. And that's concerning when I think about certain people in certain economic statuses. So that doesn't mean we shouldn't look for revenue, but it's always concerning to me. Really beyond the two revenue streams you're talking about, we still have that $800,000, I'm gonna call it hole, that we need to plug. What would we need to even get us, instead of plugging the hole, what would the amount be to start to move in the right direction fiscally? Is there a number?
Anything above that?
Or anything above that? So if we can do 859 or double, okay. I tend to agree at this point, unless somebody has an idea, and I'm all ears for possible revenue. And I hate to say this because I don't like to make cuts. I know roughly about 69, 70% of the budget is staffing. We have to plug the hole until the state changes the requirements of the levy limits. And I think one thing all 10 of us need to do is be the champion on behalf of the city and be an advocate for the city to push for changes in levy limits, because until that changes, we are going to constantly be coming back year after year, having to look at staff in the eye and go, and have that uncomfortable conversation and say, we need to make cuts. And so and I'm talking to myself, I'm probably preaching to myself more than anybody else, but I feel like we need to be fighting on behalf of the city, on behalf of the taxpayer, to demand more from the state. But that's not going to happen today. That's not going to happen before November 22nd. So I personally think we have, again, unless someone has a revenue idea, we're going to be forced to either make cuts here or in a second meeting, or we're going to have to give staff direction to say, here's the $800,000, go find it and bring it back to us. And I think that's what we have to do. And I don't think we have any other choices unless someone has a silver bullet. Thank you.
Couple quick questions that I have. I'm just looking at the summary that was provided, page 4 of our budget. And I hear the comment about levy limits and whatnot. I see that was proposed for a 0.86% tax increase. So that's part of this budget is a tax increase. How much of the allowed increase from levy limits are we actually utilizing? Are we utilizing the entire levy limit? Are we taxing? Essentially, are we looking at increasing the taxes as much as possible?
Yes, and it has been so for several years.
Okay. So this 0.86% tax increase, which comes to 9 cents per thousand, is that correct?
Correct.
Is the max that we can tax, and that's built into this plan?
Correct.
Okay. And then the 800,000, could you just, again, for simple old me, one more time explain what the 800,000 gap includes? Is that this 435 from ARPA? Is that the general fund money? Could you explain where that is currently sitting?
That would be, it's currently sitting as a transfer in from that ARPA fund. And essentially that, if we hadn't gotten the boon of ARPA, the fund balance applied line would be the 387 plus that 435. So we have it broken out as a transfer in from ARPA fund, because that's really what it would be. And then that fund balance applied is everything we couldn't find a revenue source for, from any other fund, from any other option of revenue available.
Okay. So 387,000 is being applied from the general fund, 435,000 is being applied from the ARPA money.
Yes.
We're increasing taxes by 0.86. Do we know how much what we plan to generate from that?
It's like $130,000 is all that will net.
Okay, and with all those things, with this initial budget that was presented to us, we were even. We were paying for our budget. I mean, between pulling money from the general fund, pulling money from ARPA.
Correct.
The little bit of tax increase, we were even.
Right. We presented to you a balanced budget.
Okay.
Yes.
But we've actually increased expenditures because we've taken some monies out of the EMS fund. The debt service, I think, we moved. We've actually increased some of our expenses. Is that what I understand?
You have in terms of, so what we have is a general levy, which is subject to the limitation that is going to net $10.7 million of revenue. You also have, as part of the levy, completely separate from that, is for debt. And that levy is not subject to any limitation. It is required principal and interest payments that you don't have another funding source for, which we do not. So all of our principal and interest that is coming due in 2023 gets levied separately from the general levy that's subject to a limitation. The debt service levy is not subject to any limitation whatsoever, as long as you have a scheduled interest and principal payment that is general obligation debt. So as we borrow each year, depending on how the payment schedules get allocated over the life of that debt, that number could vary drastically, but what our financial advisor is attempting to do is to structure those payments so that the amount that we have to levy for debt is rather smooth, so we don't have huge increases, because you have to levy for that in order to make your payment. So we don't want that to be having peaks and valleys. He's trying to make those payments smooth out so that it's relatively consistent. So we're looking at about $4.5 million of specific debt levy. That can shuffle a little bit either way, but that's going to be our trend going forward.
A couple of years ago, we were not levying enough to pay our debt. I think last year was the first year that we actually levied enough to pay our debt. Of the levy here, and I'm again going to use this rate here of $10.60 per thousand, I believe is what that represents. Do you have an idea of how much of that is for the debt, and how much of that is for operations or the budget that's before us?
I believe the schedule that Dave Ferris presented, he's trying to keep that amount to $2.50 of that. That's his goal, is to keep that smooth at that level.
So approximately, and I'm just going to throw numbers. I know it's not accurate, and I know Mr. Fisher's going to get mad at me, but it's about 25% of that is for debt, and about the other 75% of that is for the budget itself.
Correct.
Okay, that's all I have. I'm going to move on to Mr. Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In all the years I've been on the council, we've come up across a couple of red lines that were given to us by either finance or by the mayor. And they said, I remember walking into these meetings and they said, well, you had to cut $850,000 out of the budget, and we'll give you, 1 week to figure out how you're going to do it. And by golly, if we didn't come back the next week and find a way to weasel out of it. And we did. We never actually did that. I think one of our big faults is we've never been really willing to make cuts. And it's, to some extent, presenting us with a budget book that's, about yay thick or something like that, and then saying, okay, we have to cut X number of dollars out of this budget. You go in there and find the line items we're going to cut. And then we all try and play King Solomon and decide how to split the baby in half. And it's awful. and it's not the way to do it. I'm thinking we're going to have another meeting on this budget, I think next week. I'll have to look at my schedule, look at the calendar, and find out what date that is. But what I think should happen in the next week is we should ask for a 4% reduction across the board. And basically let the department heads figure out how to do that with their budget. And those first, when you look at the financial statement, I was just looking at, I left it somewhere. When you look at the statement of revenues and expenses, I think the first 5 or 6 divisions of, I think we call them divisions in our form of government here. You know, the general government, public safety, public works. I should be able to remember them all, but
Culture and rec.
yeah, so, okay, but you know what I'm
Conservation, all of
getting at.
those.
Those are, those particular divisions, I think we should ask them to come back with cuts of equaling 4% at the next council meeting. And part of that is cowardice, because I don't want to be the one to say, take Mary Sue and lay her off. Or you have to cut back your overtime hours in this department or that department. It's not only a matter of cowardice, it's a matter of lack of competence in those particular fields. I don't know what the department heads need. So I can't prioritize those needs for them. And I think they need to do it themselves. But what it means, though, is that the 10 of us have to have a very firm resolve that we're going to do that kind of thing. And by the way, nobody's looking harder for revenue and other revenue sources than I am. I mean, I learned down at League, there's just about a commission form of government for everything, including what was that, a transportation utility, which is a possibility, which has some very nice little benefits to it that we could possibly use. The problem is we were in a very short, compressed timeline now, and we don't have time to mess with that kind of thing and look for that magic bullet for right now. And I want you to know, in the upcoming, no matter what we do with this budget in the upcoming year, I will do everything in my power to keep from having to go to referendum. There is nothing in the world that tears a community apart any faster than a referendum. And though we don't need to come apart, we need to come together. And that's important. And with that, I'll pass it on to my colleague to my left.
Mr. Varsho.
You stated 69% is employees' salaries and whatnot.
And benefits.
That's lower than last year, I assume, being that we have vacancies in City Hall? Or no?
No, this is, we budget for approved positions.
So if you hire more people and we don't have any more money, will that raise the percentage of salaries for the budget? Or no? No. It's always going to be 69 to 70%.
For this year, right, because again, in order for that to happen, you would either have to add or remove positions from our approved list.
And with what Mr. Witzel said, page 4 on the budget there, this budget is determined on having the streetlight
Yes.
included in it?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mrs. Tompkins?
Are you going to give us your opinion?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
All right. Wow. So I've been on this council for 6 months and wow. Yeah. So what I've noticed just from being on the council for 6 months, I agree with Mrs. Spiros that there seems to be a trend that we always try to take from one fund to help another fund. And I see that trend again this year, which brings questions of, is this sustainable? Next year, we won't have ARPA funds. So next year, for sure, we have $4,335,000 we have to cut out of the budget because we won't be able to do that. So we already know that. We already are raising taxes if we approve the street light. So we already are raising taxes. We can't raise taxes with property taxes, but with just how much it costs to do anything, we have to have more money. And everyone knows that. We know that when we go grocery shopping. We know that when we fill up our car. So we fill up vehicles here and we pay for supplies here and we have to have more money. So I do have one question about ARPA. Is there a time limit to spend that money?
There is. I believe that time limit is either 2025 or 2026. Okay. So what we have for ARPA is we have a project list. So the 2023 project list you approved earlier for items that were to be funded from ARPA. I believe all of those projects are still intended to be moving forward, with the exception of that $115,000-ish that we left in reserve. So when you say that we won't have ARPA, if all of the projects that we have existing come at the budgeted level, which might be unrealistic given inflation, we would have that 115. Otherwise, that would just go to cover up, meet the gap of inflation for those projects that we have planned in 2023.
Okay. I mean, personally, I would rather use ARPA funds for something that, I would love to use it for low-income housing or affordable housing, things that would have a long-term effect, not only on the community and having people live here, but also on the property taxes we receive. That's just a personal thing. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can pass a budget that is basically saying that we have, if we don't pass those streetlight, we're $1 million low.
150 is what's built in for this year. So you would have to find another $150,000.
Right. So 950.
If we didn't go down that path, yes.
I think this is going to hurt all of us. I think I think the people living in Marshfield, if things are cut, aren't going to understand that services are going to probably not only not maybe be there, but also be much slower. That if a road needs to be fixed, it might take many more years. If Public Works needs to come and do something, it might take months. That's what budget cuts mean. If we try to call, we might not get through on the phone. We might not be able to videotape our meetings. There's all kinds of things that it will affect people. The grass might not be mowed when you want to go play soccer on our soccer fields. All of those things. That is awful. But at the same time, we cannot keep on having budgets where we're just filling it up with gaps from other places. That's not sustainable, and that's not good government. Thanks.
Mr. Paschal.
Thank you. First off, I'd like to say thank you to the Finance Department for the hours and hours and days and weeks and months of work that you put in on this budget.
Thank you.
And to the department heads here who equally spend time looking at their budgets and looking for places where they could cut. I'm sure you all had things that you'd like to spend money on that aren't in this budget. From there, I'm looking at page, let me put my glasses on here, page 18 of the budget, which is the general fund revenues, which is $23,998, $23,998,420, which is close to, let's just call it 24 million to round things around. That matches the amount of money that is in the expenditures, which is the next many, many pages of the budget, correct?
It does.
Okay. To me, that's how a budget works. I mean, I have a budget at home. I'm on a fixed income. I know how much money I'm going to have. I know how much money I have in my accounts. If I spend something unexpectedly, I have a car problem or something like that, and I need to take some money from one account and put it into another account, I don't consider that I'm stealing from myself to pay that bill that I have, which we've heard tonight. I'm stealing from the general fund. Isn't that how city government works too? If you have a shortfall in one area, the finance department finds a place where we can take some money from another account to pay off that account.
To some degree, that's accurate.
Unless we can, with a bonus.
I think it's important to note that how we are balancing our budget is what's critical here, the use of fund balance. So at the end of 21, we had about $4.5 million worth of unreserved fund balance that could be used for any purpose. That's all we have collectively for future. And if we are taking 500, 600, 700, 800,000 from that and never replenishing it, at some point that's going to zero. And with inflation going up, and if we don't make cuts, that's being accelerated. So that's the concern. It's just like you might have in your personal life a savings account. If you have $1,000 in there and you have a budget that's $1,000, but you plan to spend $1,500, it's got to come from that savings account. And if you don't have a way to replenish that, you're less secure in your financial position.
Okay, I think we can all understand that.
Yeah.
Thank you. But for this budget that you presented to us tonight, or not tonight, a couple weeks ago, you did your best to balance out our expenditures with our revenue sources.
Yes.
Okay. With that said, I don't see where cutting is necessary. I think that if we follow the budget that was presented to us, and we have to take into consideration upcoming years, but this is the budget for this year, not for 2024, 25, 26. I'm comfortable with the budget as it was presented. I especially don't see cutting out the few things that we had presentations on tonight, which comes to like 15/100ths of the budget for things that are important to our community. So I guess that's my opinion, is that we don't need to start cutting, requiring all the departments to find another 4% this year.
Mr. Fire.
Being the last guy on the dock. I've been involved with this for 23 years, and this is the biggest deficit that I've seen in a long time. And I honestly can say this. I think that if you go out to staff and say, you got to find 800,000 in a week or so, you're going to be surprised. They probably aren't going to be able to find it unless you want to destroy the city. The citizens of Marshfield I expect certain things, and if you all know that. If you think that you get people calling you now, then you start impeding on, say, their roads or garbage collection, or just take your pick, whatever it is. You're going to have citizens that are really going to be irate. And I don't really know how you're gonna find 8,000. That 800,000, what does that equate to on our levy for what is our tax gonna go up per thousand? What is it gonna cost? Do you have that figured out?
The maximum amount that we can raise is 10.7.
And we're doing, what are we paying now?
I'm sorry,
What was last year's,
10.6. So we're going to go from 10.631, I believe, to 10.75. That's the absolute max that we can increase that portion of the levy. So where the cycle can potentially lead is that we have to start borrowing for operating costs. Because then the levy for principal and interest is unlimited. And so there are communities that are in that boat. We're not there. We have that $4.5 million buffer. That's our buffer before we get to the point where we really need to consider borrowing to pay staff salaries or, to provide police service. On a levy of $10.7 million, public safety cost in this year's budget is going to be $9.75 million. The levy barely covers the cost of public safety. Everything else comes through state aids, which are also fixed, or the limited amount of fees that we charge today, and the odd grant that comes our way. So when you talk in terms of a levy funding public services, when you think of it, the cost of public safety is at that level. Everything, or take your pick, the combination of public works and recreation would be about the same. Take your pick. That leaves, no revenue source available to fund all the other parts of the government.
I guess we take a swing at it and see what happens. But I can tell you that anybody that's listening and is watching, and if they understand, they don't want the increase, but bless us all. Put it on.
Anything else, Mr. Fire?
No.
Okay. Two quick questions that came to mind, and to use the scenario that you so nicely brought forth. The fund balance is the savings account. When was the last time we added money to the savings account or to the fund balance?
I'm sorry, I'd have to get back to you on that. I don't, it's my first year here. I haven't memorized the prior year financials, but, if I had to think about it, even, probably as I was trying to look at some other information, if we had a fund balance of say $10 million, even 5 or 6 years ago, given our situation in 2019 where we had to do some course corrections with debt, that really took a hit to the general funds balance to get us into this point of being at 4.5 million.
So each year we're dropping our savings account?
A little bit.
All right, and then what effect does lowering the fund balance have on bond rating?
That would be problematic for our bond rating. We worked very hard we were in a position of negative outlook. We worked very hard to get that removed. It would be likely if we continue at this pace that our bond rating would decline, which means, as it becomes a very tough spiral, then we might be forced to borrow more money, but it's going to cost us even more to borrow that same amount of money going forward.
Mr. Fisher?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think anybody in this room wants to make cuts. So I just want to get that out there because I think that's being implied, and I want to correct that idea. I can speak for myself. I don't enjoy the idea of making cuts, but I want to go back to what you said, Jennifer, because I'm not sure if we fully grasp what you said, and it was very good. if you keep borrowing from the savings account and you take everything out of the savings account, you have no reserves. Right now, we are borrowing from our savings account to pay our bills. We are creating an internal line of credit, for lack of a better word, and we are taking money from reserves to pay the bills. If you did that in your household, eventually you get to a point where you have no more money. And if we want to kick this can down, we can kick the can down. But what's going to happen is it's going to get worse next year, and we're not going to want to kick the can down. It's going to get worse the year after, and it's going to keep getting worse. I don't like this. It kills me inside to even have this conversation. But I personally feel that I was elected to make fiduciary decisions on behalf of the taxpayers, and we can't keep borrowing money internally to pay the bills. Something has to change. And I don't know if they can come up with $800,000 or not, but we have, in my opinion, we have to do this because we cannot. I do not even want to consider a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, what the picture looks like if we don't do it today. So I am going to make a motion that we direct staff to try and find $800,000 worth of cuts.
We have a motion by Mr. Fisher to direct staff to reevaluate budgets for $800,000. We have a second by Mr. O'Reilly. Discussion. Mr. Wagner.
Thank you. The reason that I feel a little bit uncomfortable with using it as $850,000 worth of cuts. I would much rather we express it as a percentage, as the 4%, because I think on some departments are not going to be able to do it. I mean, Adam, you know, at county, we have this nightmare scenario. We have a lot of departments that are 1 or 2 people. And the only thing they support is the salaries for 2 people. And we send out a mandate from the operations committee and says, okay, you got to cut your budget by 10%. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to go back to 90%? Are they going to lay off somebody or what? So there are some departments that get a pass on that because they don't have the resources to do anything. But we have some large departments. We have 3 or 4 very large departments. And if they can't squeeze 4% out, I'd be very, very surprised. So I would rather see this expressed as the amount necessary to cover that 800,000, which is 4%. Or you said 3.9, didn't you say, Adam? So, okay. But that's the way I'd rather do it. And somebody made the comment, there was a time in my 13, 14 years on the council that we did have $10, $11 million set aside in that reserve fund. We did do that, and we basically whittled it away down to nothing. And what we're ignoring in all this is we have a city policy that says we must have this percentage in reserve, and we have ignored that for some period of time, and it's catching up with us. Just can't do that. Thank you.
Mr. Fisher? Who does? Mr. Fisher, you have a motion to amend.
So I'm going to amend the motion to do 4%.
So we have a motion to amend to change that to a 4% change, or reduction, I should say. second by Mr. Wagner. Mrs. Spiros.
Thank you. A couple of follow-ups here. I just have to address a couple of things. I want to reiterate that this is extremely painful for all of us up here. There's nobody who's enjoying doing this. I wish that we could just continue down the track and keep things at status quo and all that kind of stuff, but we just cannot do it. And I hate hearing that, you know, eventually if we spend down our 4.5 million, which is what we have in our fund balance, our savings account, that we would have to start borrowing to pay operating expenses. That should never happen. We should never, ever, ever get to that point. That is a dangerous point, and you're just ready and circling the drain at that point, in my opinion. But just to put things into perspective, I mean, we're talking a lot about the effects on the citizens and the taxpayers, and that certainly is first and foremost in our heads. And but I do want to reiterate that our taxpayers are not stupid people. They understand right now the economy that we're in, or they, at the very least, they understand the economy is bad. I mean, they understand that when they go and they pay for their gas and their groceries and their medicine that they can't afford, and their increased taxes and things like that. And I really feel there's a significant portion of people who are fiscally conservative, and they understand that you cannot continue to spend when inflation is this high, the same amount of money, and not get any more coming in. I mean, so I don't want to push that off as that the whole community just quite would not understand what we're doing here. Jennifer, we have 4.5 million left in the fund balance, and how many years, if we kept on this train, would it take for that to be down to zero?
5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah.
Right. So I think that's really important for people to understand who are listening out there. We are strapped. We are making cuts because this is the last resort. It's something that it has to be done, and it pains me, and I think it pains all of my colleagues. Is there a better way to? When we talked about there was a motion made for the 800,000 and then an amendment for the 4%. Jennifer, is there one way or the other that is better way to approach that, in your opinion?
The actual percent is going to be 3.54 if you want to go as a percent. Trying to make that go across the departments will be a challenge for the exact points that Mr. Wagner stated. So if I could, at this, if you want to target or give a recommendation on where to go, I think sometimes staff may have an issue interpreting what the community wants. We don't hear directly from staff. That's you, where to prioritize the dollars. So making it 3.5% across the board may not be a reasonable request. So if you could give some guidance on whether that's Health and Human Services, Conservation and Development, General Government, Culture and Rec, Public Works, Public Safety. If you think of it in terms of voting with your dollars, where are the priorities? Because in absence of a direction, staff will create the priority. So, no one wants to cut a budget. We've made that very clear. Everything in all of these departments' budgets is what those departments already feel is necessary.
Okay. All right. That makes things difficult.
It does.
For the reasons that Mr. Wagner stated earlier, we don't sit in these departments. So it's a harder call for us to make than it should be for the department heads. It's difficult. Listen, I'm not trying to push it off on anybody, but we're not sitting there in these departments, okay? So, for me to sit down with the chief of police, for example, this is only an example. If I had to sit down with the chief of police, of course he's going to tell me, look, I made as many cuts as I could, and we're operating at the very, on a shoestring budget. You know, I'm not going to come into his department and say, I think you're wrong, because I don't work there, you know, 40 hours plus a week. So that makes it really difficult. And you know, I would rather see our department heads come together, perhaps in multiple meetings, and we put down a 3.54% cut, and they just have to come up with it among the department heads. They have to come up with it. And the decisions have to be, I think, there, and they know better than we do. And I don't know if that's an answer or not, but it's just, I'm going to stop at that point because I don't know what else to say.
All right, just for clarification, the amendment was a 4%.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Mrs. Tompkins and Mr. Wagner have more to talk about the specific amendment, or if we want to work on that amendment first, and then we discuss the motion as it's been amended, if it doesn't get amended, or what we want to do on that. So Mrs. Tompkins, you're up if you want to be, otherwise we can come back to you later. Come back later? Okay, Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
Come back later, or?
No, I'd rather get it, I'd rather have us discuss now what, make sure we know what we're voting on, because the 4%. You just said it's actually what, 5%?
3.54.
Oh, 3.54.
So
I guarantee you're not going to come back here with 4% on the nose.
No.
You know that too, right? All right. I'd much rather, okay, we know what it is. Let's vote on the amendment and get it on the floor, and then I'll have something here for you.
All right, so we have an amendment to change the reduction to a 4% reduction rather than a dollar amount reduction. No further discussion. We will vote on that specific item. So we're voting on changing the initial motion to be a percentage instead of a dollar amount. So please vote. Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
Okay, so that passes 8-2. Now we have the motion as amended is to direct staff to come back with a reduction of what's been amended to be a 4% change, or reduction, I should say. Any discussion on that now? Mrs. Tompkins, did you want to speak?
Well, I just wanted to remind all of us that if we do vote for this, we will still have ARPA funds that I think we need to be very intentional in using.
Agreed.
Any other questions or comments? Just as a quick aside, if we did not have that ARPA funding and this budget were to pass as it was presented, that would reduce our general fund by $800,000.
867,000, yes.
So 5 years from now, we would have nothing.
Possibly.
Okay. All right. So we have the motion as it was amended to direct staff to reduce budget by 4%. Any further discussion? Seeing none, go ahead and vote, please. Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
That passes 8-2. Anything else for council discussion or possible changes to discuss, or do we want to just wait until the next meeting? Mr. Wagner?
Mr. Chairman, the finance director just said it would be helpful if we could give some direction. I don't know if this helps then or not. I'm looking at the CIP for 2023, and I'm looking at the taxes funded by tax levy. That is not loan proceeds. That's actually coming out of that general fund levy. Is that correct?
Yes, which really doesn't exist, right? So essentially those items end up on short-term borrowing. As we're learning how the CIP is put together, how it correlates to the budget, there isn't It would be an intentional use of fund balance, let's put it that
You
way.
should cut anything. I'm saying you
Yep.
should look there.
Mhm.
All right, so Jay has questions or further direction from the council. If more information is desired, I think we already took care of that with that motion. Letter I is to set date time for the next budget meeting, which currently is Monday, November 7th at 5:30 PM. Now, I know that that is a conflict with the mayor. I also am not certain that 6 days is enough for what we've asked of the staff. So I would be open for any discussion regarding that date. Yes, you may comment.
You are dangerously close to your statutory requirements on notices and public hearing. So if you are going to delay, you really have very little wiggle room, because with the November 7th, we already have a special meeting Monday, November 28th to do that public hearing.
All right, so everybody has their calendar out. What do we have for a ballpark from the staff in terms of what you think you need for timing? I know that you're speaking on behalf of Mr. Bard, who chose not to, or who couldn't make it today.
Jessica, what would be the last possible date? And then we would, let's back it up from there, that we, in order to meet our publishing requirements.
I have to look back at what date we have deadline for the county. We're right up against it.
So
December 1st is the last date of the county. So we have maybe 3 days to play.
so the next scheduled meeting is November the 7th. Is that accurate?
That's what we had on the calendar, but again, the mayor is not able to attend that date.
So let's look for the Tuesday.
We have a common council meeting on the 8th.
I think anything past that, and we may miss our some deadlines.
Would the 8th work for everybody? It's Tuesday, the 8th. It's 7 days from today. That gives the staff 7 days. We have a council meeting, which means we're going to have to readjust everything. We'll have to have the budget meeting at 5 o'clock and the council meeting at 7 o'clock, as we've done in the past. Let's have some action. Anybody? Mr. Fisher?
I will make a motion to move the budget meeting to Tuesday, November 8th at 5 o'clock.
With the council meeting changing to 7.
Yes, I'm sorry, yeah.
All right,
thought that was
so
a
we have a
given.
motion by Mr. Fisher, second by Mr. Varsho. So we will have the next budget meeting on the 8th, 5 PM, and the council meeting at 7 PM if this motion passes. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Oh. Okay. All right, seeing none, please vote.
Who was the second for that?
The second was Mr. Varsho.
Yes.
Mr. Wagner, are you having computer problems? That passes unanimously. So we will meet again on the 8th. Letter, I don't even know because there were 2 J's and 2 I's. The last item on the agenda is the adjournment. I will entertain a motion. Motion by Mr. O'Reilly to adjourn. Seconded by Mrs. Tompkins. Do we really need to vote or can we just? We're adjourned.
Yes.